The Xbox Lockhart, or the Xbox Series S as we are now calling it, could end up being more powerful than was first anticipated, and some new leaks show some very interesting data. Nintendo talks about potentially replacing Nintendo Directs and how JoyCon Drift is an issue. A new Monster Hunter game is potentially in development, but it's not what you think it is or probably really want it to be. And finally, some big Nintendo Switch games get a release date, and they're coming pretty soon, thus making my July Nintendo Switch games video look a bit dated now. What's going on, guys? I'm RGT85. If this is your first time on the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. But without any further ado, let's talk about what's going on in the world of video games. So a system we've been talking about a lot recently on the channel is of course the Xbox Series X. Now the Xbox Series X was of course unveiled before the PlayStation 5, so we were talking about it then, and then the PlayStation 5 came along and stole a lot of the buzz that the Xbox Series X had, because of course the Xbox Series X was showing off third-party games, whereas you saw a better combination of both first-party and third-party games from the PlayStation 5 event. But the Xbox Series X is of course getting its own event happening in July, where they are going to showcase first-party titles for this system, and I think it's going to be very exciting. There's still a lot of positive buzz around the Xbox Series X. Like I said, we've been covering it over the past few weeks on the channel, all of the latest news and information, and of course one of the more interesting facets of the Xbox Series lineup of systems is the potential for the Xbox Lockhart, or what we are calling it the Xbox Series S, potentially a cheaper version of the Xbox Series X, which will be an all-digital system. Now of course PlayStation really blew the lid off of everything when showing the PlayStation 5 was going to have two versions of that system, an all-digital system and of course a system that will accept physical media, which is the one that I'm definitely leaning forward to. But it seemed like the price discrepancy between the PlayStation 5 variants and the Xbox Series variants is going to be very different. A lot of people are anticipating that the Xbox Series X could be around the $200 to $300 range for the all-digital version of the system, whereas the PlayStation 5 all-digital system will be of course around the $400 to $500 range potentially, with potentially only a $100 price cut between the all-digital and the physical system. We're saying potentially a lot in this video, but that's okay. But now we've gotten some more information about the Xbox Series S from Tom Warren, the senior editor over at Verge, saying some very interesting things about this system. He went on record on Twitter as saying that the Lockhart CPU is actually faster than the PlayStation 5 CPU, that Lockhart will support ray tracing, and that game developers have been building PC titles for multiple GPUs for decades, essentially kind of piggybacking of our other train of thought, which is how the Xbox Series S was potentially going to work. Obviously, when you're playing a game on the PC, you have a baseline that you have to do it in order to run the game, and then as you have more impressive things like better graphics cards, you of course can get more optimization out of these games, and that really seems to be sort of Xbox's motif for the next generation, that being high levels of optimization. But the fact that the CPU is potentially stronger than what is in the PlayStation 5, and the Xbox Lockhart, or Xbox Series X, will actually support ray tracing, which has been a huge buzzword for this upcoming generation, is honestly very, very impressive to me. Now, more than likely what this means is that you won't get as high of frame rates as you would on the Xbox Series X, and of course you wouldn't be able to get things like 4K and potentially even 8K out of the system, more than likely maxing out at 1440p. But I think for the average consumer who this market is probably targeting, that person who just likes to buy games like Madden and Call of Duty every year, the Xbox Series S could be potentially a very valuable system, because of course you're able to get these next generation games and not really sacrifice all that much in terms of performance if you don't have a nice 4K setup or anything like that. I think this fact really speaks to volumes as to what Microsoft is planning to do with this upcoming console generation. They really seem to be focusing on this whole optimized thing, and I think it could potentially work out in their favor. Of course, we still need to see first-party games from Microsoft to get excited about. We did talk about the potential for two franchises returning to the Xbox Series family of consoles in our last video about the Xbox Series X, so make sure you guys go check that out. But all in all, I'm definitely really looking forward to this Xbox Series X event, hopefully learning about the Xbox Series S as well, and of course getting some price points, release dates, and some games that are going to be available for this system. Nintendo recently held their annual shareholders meeting, this being the 80th one in company history, and some interesting information is starting to come out from that. The first thing we're going to talk about is Nintendo Directs, because, well, it's been a while since we've gotten a Nintendo Direct. There's actually a Twitter account that will track how many days since it's been since a proper Nintendo Direct, and today we are currently at the 300-day mark, so it has been quite a while since we got a proper Nintendo Direct, the last one, of course, being in September of 2019. Now, during this shareholders meeting, President Furukawa was asked about Nintendo Direct events, and he basically said that while Directs are an effective means of conveying new game content and announcements, the company could come up with something that's more effective in the future. Nintendo always has to constantly evolve their way of thinking, so something else could end up replacing Nintendo Directs down the road, which is something that we have heard, and also something is that we've sort of seen from Nintendo themselves with, of course, doing stealth game announcement. Now, do I necessarily think that Nintendo is just going to can Nintendo Directs with this sort of statement? No, not at all. But I think they are looking towards the future to see different ways that they can convey, game announcements and game news without having to do a Nintendo Direct. Now, what that could potentially be, I'm not quite sure, because when Nintendo first started doing Nintendo Directs, people thought they were crazy. But then, of course, since then, both Xbox and PlayStation have sort of followed suit in that sort of Nintendo Direct style of presentation because it really just works well. I personally don't want to see Nintendo Directs go away completely, but I do understand the necessity to sort of adapt to real world situations and, of course, have to do things like just stealth drop announced games like they did with Paper Mario the Origami King. As long as we're getting information on games, I don't think people would necessarily care what the medium is for that. It's just that Nintendo Directs have become such a standard thing for Nintendo fans to sort of look forward to and hype up and sort of wonder what's going to be at these events. Now, another thing is Nintendo never really talks about JoyCon Drift, and depending on who you ask, JoyCon Drift may just be sort of made up, but to me personally, it's not made up. I am on my third set of Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons since purchasing the system back in March of 2017, and my current set of Joy-Cons have the JoyCon Drift, especially on the left-hand side. So I feel that JoyCon Drift is very, very real, and Nintendo has always sort of skirted around this thing that JoyCon Drift was an actual thing. Well, President Furukawa actually apologized to Nintendo Switch owners suffering from JoyCon Drift at the moment during this shareholders meeting, but unfortunately that was all he could really say on the event since there is a class action lawsuit happening in the States, and he would not go on to say anything otherwise. But JoyCon Drift honestly is just a pain in the ass, and I've actually gotten to the point now where I've gotten rid of my Joy-Cons. I now use the Hori pad to sort of use my Nintendo Switch in handheld mode because I love using my Nintendo Switch in handheld mode. I love sitting on the couch and watching a movie or something while playing it's just some online first-person shooter, or just having a fun time playing something laying in bed while watching a movie or something like that. And this Hori Joy-Con setup is definitely a lot better for me. It's a lot more comfortable and it's cheaper. It's only $50 compared to the $80 for the Joy-Cons. Now, you are losing some of the Joy-Con functionality, of course, when you're using something like this, but I do feel like this is a very viable option for Nintendo Switch owners who are suffering from Joy-Con Drift because it's a cheaper alternative, and I'm sure you don't really use your Joy-Cons all that much in the same manner as you would, taking them out and using the IR motion censoring and whatnot. There are some Nintendo Switch games that, of course, require you to use your Joy-Cons, but those are really few and far between. So I'm not quite sure why Nintendo has just been sort of skirting around this Joy-Con Drift issue, because obviously it is a real thing. It is a real thing that affects tons of Nintendo Switch owners. I've tried cleaning out my Joy-Cons. I've tried everything. It's obviously something in the build quality of the Joy-Cons themselves. Something is going awry with this, and it's just a really unfortunate situation. So hopefully Nintendo can sort of figure out something like this on the manufacturing end to sort of dwindle what Joy-Con Drift is causing people, because if you can't control your games, like, what's the point of playing them? Besides Nintendo, Capcom also had a shareholders meeting, and there was some interesting stuff about Monster Hunter, and, well, I really don't like it. So one of the first things that was brought up was whether this very successful Monster Hunter World was going to be making the jump to the Nintendo Switch, to which Capcom said there are no plans for that at this time. And honestly, I don't really foresee that game coming to the Nintendo Switch. I would think they would want to build a Monster Hunter game for the ground up. When you look at how successful the Nintendo Switch has been in Japan, and of course Monster Hunter is a very successful franchise in Japan, that really seems seems like something more along the lines that they would do, building up a proper Monster Hunter game, as Monster Hunter World was a bit different. It took the series in a bit of a different direction. But after that, Capcom was asked about a Monster Hunter title that was aimed at like middle school and high school kids, similar to what was available on the PSP years ago, and the team confirmed that they had plans for something like that, but didn't mention any platforms in particular. And I sat here wondering myself, what the hell Monster Hunter game was released on the PSP that was like, you know, for middle schoolers and stuff like that? The PSP Monster Hunter games I remember were just sort of offshoots of the PS2 games, and they were full-on Monster Hunter experiences. But then Nate from Direct Feed Games, good old Nate the Hate, reminded me of a game that I guess I just blocked out of my memory. Granted, it only came out in Japan, but it was a game called Monster Hunter Diaries, and well, just look at it. Just look at it. They actually put some Hello Kitty stuff into this game, and like, if this is the new Monster Hunter game that's coming out, just keep it. Just keep it, because I don't think anyone wants this. Obviously, Monster Hunter Stories, which came out on the 3DS, was a really good game. Yes, it was different than other Monster Hunter games, maybe geared more towards a younger audience, but I still thought the game itself was very, very solid. But this Monster Hunter Diaries thing, I don't think any modern Monster Hunter fans want to see this style of game or want to see a game like this. So hopefully this isn't what they're working on. Hopefully it's a Monster Hunter Story style game instead of a Monster Hunter Diary style game, but it'll be very interesting to see what ends up happening with the future of Monster Hunter, as right now it is one of Capcom's most successful franchises. And finally, a couple days ago on the channel, we of course talked about the upcoming Nintendo Switch games for the month of July video, as we do every month. And since then, there's been 3 game announcements that are coming in July for the Nintendo Switch, some very sizable games, and it's kind of annoying because, well, that video is already up, but hey, at least more games are coming. Of course, yesterday on the channel, we talked, of course, about Bloodstained, Curse of the Moon 2 coming to the Nintendo Switch and other platforms on July 10th. I'm really super looking forward to this game. I can't wait to play it. I love the original Curse of the Moon. Bloodstained, I think, could be a very viable franchise to sort of replace Castlevania, since, well, Castlevania is pretty much dead and buried by Konami. So I'm definitely looking forward to Curse of the Moon 2. Some awesome new additions into this game. I think the character sprites look great, the enemies look great, the environments look great, there's new characters to play as, there's multiplayer, just a really well done sequel from what we've seen from it so far, and Inti Creates usually does a very good job with these games. But like I said, since then there's actually been 2 more game announcements of games coming out in the month of July that have concrete release dates. The first game is Superliminal, which will be coming to the Nintendo Switch on July 7th. So like a week from now, depending on when you're watching this video, you'll be able to play Superliminal. Now, Superliminal is a really weird puzzle game. I know a lot of streamers were playing this game when it released on Steam because of just how weird and just really, I don't even know another word to describe it. Bizarre, maybe we could say it's a bit bizarre, but it's definitely a very interesting puzzle game that takes place in a first-person perspective, kind of like Portal-ish, but it's not really Portal-ish because you're taking pieces of the environment and basically using them to progress through these puzzles. It's a really cool looking game. I might actually end up checking this out on the Nintendo Switch, as I haven't played a really interesting puzzle game like this in quite a while. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this game performs on the Nintendo Switch, and I think this could end up being a big sleeper hit on the system. But the second game is arguably a lot more interesting to me, and that is a game that we actually talked about yesterday on the channel, but we did not have a release date for it, and that is Crysis Remastered. Yes, Crysis Remastered appears to be coming in July as well, with a July 23rd release date that was leaked by the Microsoft Store. Now, of course, tomorrow on July 1st, Crysis Remastered will be getting a presentation where they're going to be showing the gameplay for this and, of course, unveiling the release date, but it looks like that release date is already out in the wild as July 23rd. Now, this game will be coming to the Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, and PS4, and it's being handled by Saber Interactive, which, if you're a Nintendo Switch owner, you should know that Saber Interactive usually does very top-notch work when it comes to games like Ghostbusters, the video game remastered, and of course The Witcher 3 on the Nintendo Switch. I think Saber Interactive is one of the best port machines on the system. Now, Crysis Remastered also has a leaked trailer that is going around the internet right now, but I'm not going to share it because there are some people that feel that this trailer isn't necessarily indicative of the game. Some people feel that it's a fan-made trailer, but it could end up being the trailer that we end up seeing tomorrow. Now, some screenshots have been leaked for the game as well, and it's causing a little bit of a controversy because it does seem seem like it's more of just an upscaling of the original Crysis instead of being rebuilt from the ground up. Now, supposedly, this will be using the Crytek engine and all of the latest facets of the Crytek engine, and really, to me, that doesn't bother me that it's not like this huge generational leap or anything like that, because Crysis back in the day was still a very popular game because of just how groundbreaking it was in terms of things like graphics, and I don't believe that this is going to be a full-on $60 game as well. I definitely anticipate this being a budget release, maybe a $40 release for something like that, so I'm not expecting, you know, the sky's the limit with this game or anything like that. And obviously the development time on this game hasn't been very long, but it's definitely very interesting to see more and more companies announce games and then have a very quick turnaround when it comes to things like release dates. So yes, Crysis Remastered will be coming to the Nintendo Switch, the PS4, and the Xbox One on July 23rd. So now the Nintendo Switch has a great variety of both first-party and third-party games for the month of July, and I will definitely be picking up Crysis Remastered because I want to see what the hubbub is with this game. Like I said, I only played Crysis 3 back in the day, so I want to see what this original Crysis brings to the table, and plus I'm a sucker for first-person shooters. Alright, so that is going to do it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Be sure to let me know your thoughts on everything in the comments section down below. And as always, thank you for checking out this video. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Be sure to check out other videos on the channel as well. We've put up a bunch of stuff. Make sure you watch the July Nintendo Switch games video because, well, it is a little bit outdated now. There is some other games in there that you definitely need to know about. And of course, I will catch you guys on the next video. There's some thunder going on in the background right now. Later.